Here we are, man. It's the finale episode of our Miracleman coverage on Read More Comics, Moore. My name's Ed Piskor, riding shotgun's Tom Scioli. In the top left, the homeboy Jim Mahfood, and top right, Benjamin Mara. We're going to cover issues 12 through 16 of Miracleman in one tidy episode, hopefully, man. And I don't know about you guys, but there's a lot to say. Yeah. This is beautiful work. And I'm looking forward to getting into it with you fellas.
Yeah, I mean, if we're going to hit this all as one go, it's kind of like, to me, it's like there's three major elements. There's the Miracle Woman episode, Aphrodite, like her whole story.
Yes.
Then there's the big fight with Kid Miracle Man. And then there's the sort of
the finale.
Epilogue, yeah, the aftermath, the end where they solve all the world's problems. Those are like the three major movements of this last piece.
The denouement.
Yeah,
I agree with that, and it's amazing that that third part is only one issue's worth of stuff. Yes. Man. So I imagine we're going to spend some time on that for sure, man. But it does start off like we left off with issue 11. Miracleman is in that Olympus sanctuary, and just kind of floating around. Still, you don't see anybody with him, man. He's still all by himself, kind of recalling that a lot has transpired to get him to this place. One of the things I wanted to bring up, because there is so much good to all of this, but we're not fanboys, and we're not going to be idolaters and keep binary and say things are perfect. This is one of those segments where the actual storytelling with the words and pictures is confusing. We
totally falls apart.
Yeah, we all have civilian homies in our lives who probably has said the same thing, man. Yeah, I took a look at comics and I don't know how to read them. I've heard that a lot of times in my life, and these issues kind of have some of that. When you have these long, tall panels with captions on the top and bottom, how do you read them? How do you read them?
Sometimes those tall panels don't even have borders on them that direct you to which caption to read next. So you're across, but you should be reading up and down. And there's simply no visual element that is pointing you in the right direction.
Yeah, there is some slight misdirection happening with some of this stuff, with these grandiose descriptions by Alan Moore that are, of course, incredibly well written and brilliant, but the imagery and the direction that some of it's going in, it becomes slightly unclear of what's happening. I mean, John Totlebin's drawings themselves are gorgeous. And on page 2 of issue 12, panel 3, Alan Moore predicts people sitting at home jerking off to internet pornography. I'm not sure if you guys noticed that.
Yeah, he predicts the internet.
Yeah, the internet flat out. Yeah. He talks about, the web of telephonic communication, and it's he isn't far off at all.
When we get further into this story, he kind of predicts everything. It's a very, cogent analysis of kind of the moment we're in now. Take
a look at Watchmen again. We'll do that episode eventually, and he talks about cars that need lithium-ion batteries and shit, and it's those were 30 years away.
Yeah, I mean, he was way into futurologists. He'd read the books by all these guys who would make these reasoned predictions about things, and so he was spot on, 30 years ahead or whatever, 40 years.
Yeah, and last time we mentioned, lots of incredible epic psychedelic prog rock imagery. I think John Totleben is flexing his skills here and having a blast and just making all this crazy looking shit and doing an incredible job at it, Yeah,
big jukebox.
It's a tall task that Moore places on the drawing board for Totleben to conquer. It's a really big challenge. Those sequences of Miracleman just floating around in his headquarters.
Right.
And Totleben does a very good job of giving us the feeling of how big that space is.
Yeah.
And how like filled up and like opulent it is. It's not something that like many comic book artists would have like the vision or ability to succeed at doing, but he does a good job with it.
Well, we were talking about the tall panels being difficult to read, but like they do lend an air of verticality of like that.
Yes.
We're in this vast, very tall space. It's all about. It's not about width. We're not in some vast desert. We're in this, this cathedral.
And I can't help but imagine that Totleben must have done a lot of back end work in the sketchbook to map out the kind of geography of this Olympus structure, because it feels like it's planned. Like you see repeated things at different angles, and you get some idea of destination whenever you see him floating around, and it's repeated throughout. He's not just, this isn't a Kirby piece where it's just
he's
like
making it up as he goes.
Exactly. Yeah, it's like, it's more toward Seth or Chris Ware when they design little paper mache blueprint maps and schematics.
Yeah, with Supreme, Rick Veitch created like a map of Supreme's Supreme Citadel. So maybe somewhere John Totleben has the map that we haven't seen, the cutaway view of this.
Those are the tall panels, and then it launches into the past, the place where we left off at the end of book 2, and that first page, that's the first person shooter sequence, man, which is just freaking awesome, dude. Seeing it through the superhero's eyes, like every little boy who reads a comic, like that's sort of like what's going on in their mind anyhow, man. So more in Totleben, they gave that to us here. Excellent use of white too whenever the alien uses their little gimmick word, man. It's just using pure white.
Yeah, super effective. There's a sense of relief when you get to these pages, for me anyway, where it's like, okay, the poetic narrative in the beginning is fine, but I kind of want to be with these characters in this room and get some dialogue and find out like what is happening. I'm excited to hear what these characters are going to say and how this situation is unfolding.
Well, I'd say that is one of the downsides of this sort of like bookended approach that he takes for this like last volume, the book 3 of Miracleman, is, for all you gain from it, you do lose that sense of immediacy that like we're like really directly involved in. It feels like there is a remove, like we're watching this from a distance, a lot of these parts, and when we do get back to this sort of more nuts and bolts stuff, it is like, oh yeah, this is how this comic used to be, where you're like in the thick of it, and then you go back to those very like God's view of things or whatever.
Right.
After that chase sequence, it gets us back to Mike Moran's house. Wife and baby, Liz is there, and so is Miracle Woman. Yeah. So we get the scoop on the Miracle Woman origin. Trigger warnings. There's definitely going to be some rape talk in these pages here, and what Moore is trying to get across whenever he's describing her origins and how Gargunza created like a new like sort of perfect body for this character, and he was having he was abusing her. The words that he puts in her mouth are designed to be like she's above that in a way, like where she laughs about it, ha ha ha, like he's so small-minded, all he wanted was my body, and there's so much more here, like what a simple creature.
Yeah, this issue, like my collection of Miracleman ended like right before this issue, so it was like years and years before I read this, and it takes such a dark turn in this issue. Like everything up until this, like it's a real, and you wonder like how much of this was pre-planned, or how much of it was just more like sort of evolving, or again like testing the limits of, okay, I'm doing like an independent comic, no comics code, whatever, let me see how far I can. But it's like it's really jarring. Like it kind of like shakes you as a reader,
especially that sequence. It's like that's real tough, man.
Yeah, it just reveals like like a greater darkness to Gargunza. And I don't know if maybe by this point, to like sort of up the stakes or something with Gargunza, to give like, to make him sort of, villainous again or hateful. It was like, okay, this ups the stakes, but it's kind of, it's like, oh, this comic isn't really fun anymore.
Right.
Right. I think he's Alan Moore's introducing the idea that Gargunza is this supremely wicked, evil as fuck supervillain.
Mm-hmm.
He's not just a crazy mad scientist who wanted this dream of eternal life. It's like, this is a disturbed, fucked up character. And this issue kind of slams your face right into that idea where, I mean, Tom, like you said, it's like, oh, this isn't fun. This is getting into some like dark shit here,
I would feel like Moore is with this story in particular, he's like really desperate to try to introduce like real world sort of elements into like, this superhero fantasy story, or just look at superheroes through that lens, and he's doing it through every sort of facet, and so it feels like to me like the Gargunza's abuse is like another attempt to try to anchor all of this in like some kind of like reality, like this is actually what would happen if we had this sociopath creating these idyllic human beings. Like, wouldn't he like want to dominate them in every single way?
Yeah, I mean, it is like it is consistent. Like, it's shocking, but it's still consistent.
Yeah.
With the character, you mean?
With the character, but it's kind of consistent with reality as we're beginning to understand it to be.
Oh, right,
with,
like
all
in
the
the
stuff in the
modern
news and
right.
stuff. You know what I mean? Like, it's
I don't know about you guys, but whenever I am working on kind of like a longer project, I will go back and read earlier parts, try to be my own editor, see what dangling threads I may have left, and perhaps address them as I go. Did that with the hip hop thing, did that with the X-Men thing, these multi-year projects. One of the Miracleman pieces that was a little unclear to me earlier, and I brought it up on earlier episodes, was was Miracleman, was he ever conscious?
Yeah.
Was he ever sentient?
did they ever wake him up and actually send him out on a mission?
And in this issue, it seems like Moore saw that as being maybe like a dark spot in the earlier comics, that he could find some fruit.
Yeah.
And he does address that here in this issue. But I do want to call attention to that John Totleben, C.C. Beck homage kind of artwork. It's like the guy can fucking do it all, and he does it all in this issue right here, man, because his Golden Age artwork is as sublime and beautiful as that pointillist portrait on, page or two earlier.
And we talk about these things being spreads, being designed as spreads, and it is like a really well-composed spread. You have on the upper left the sort of 80s Miracle Woman, looking like a cross between Brigitte Nielsen and Madonna, and maybe a little Debbie Harry. And then the lower right corner is that like nostalgic. You got the state-of-the-art 80s and nostalgic 50s, kind of like in opposite corners.
Great mix, man. Totleben is bringing it, So
it doesn't
good.
It doesn't even look like the same artist.
No.
Right.
When I was a student at the Kubert School, I would hear a lot of legend and stuff from some of the teachers who were students as well. And one of the guys who was there for a while, he told me about Totlben's like first jobs, even when he was still a student at the Joe Kubert School, was he was hired under the tutelage of this guy named Harry Chesler, who was a Golden Age kind of packager, kind of like the Eisner Iger kind of characters. Get a sweatshop essentially together with a bunch of eager beaver young boys who are stoked to have anything to do. Package up a bunch of strips and sell them to Victor Fox or whatever. And he was known as Harry the Chiseler Chesler. The idea
that nickname is just a natural fit,
yeah. You want a raise? Here are more pages to draw. But it was like steeped in that old school, like thick brush lines, slinging ink like that. Headlight comics, that types of shit, man. So it's like he's dusting off those muscles.
Mentioning the Headlight comics and stuff, I think like Moore is partially with this segment maybe doing like a commentary about comics itself, about comics history, like a meta commentary, and that sort of like the female characters, like and like Wonder Woman in particular, that there's like so much of like the male gaze in them in those like early days, and that it is sort of these like stunted male fantasy depictions of idealized women heroine that's tied up in their own, like tied up in the creator's kinks or what their dysfunction, and that maybe there's a little bit of that too, like if we're doing like a tour of comics history, it's kind of like this maybe to more was sort of a natural place to put it. And then you also have the other child that Gargunza abuses, and like his character name from the original comic is Young Nasty Man. So I don't know if even like just that name for Moore like conjured up some kind of like image or some kind of like direction, like that name in itself seems to suggest something kind of gruesome.
Anything on that? I can keep rocking.
Yeah, I'm just looking at this gorgeous artwork, man. The page where we see like Miracle Woman with the octopus.
Yes, tentacle porn.
Crazy, just technique and style happening here. Just really interesting imagery, like stuff that you had if you grew up on American superhero comics. Like this is just something completely different.
If you look at the history of comics, some of the finest drawing moments are when they're drawing an octopus. Hal
Foster,
Prince Valiant. Like you just go to Wally Wood. Like you go down the list, and everybody's finest Barry Windsor Smith. It's like somebody involved with like an octopus. I don't know if that just because it's just like a different kind of form that you don't usually draw.
The octopus is like a test for the artist litmus test or something. That's a good point.
Where we left off last episode, Miracle Woman kind of smashed the neck of one of these villains. The Warp Smiths come by, and they gotta basically hold a tribunal of sorts back in their home world, man. And this is where
time out,
Yeah, and this is where stuff gets super imaginative. Moore is like pulling from all of like his pulp knowledge to tell us those stories, man. But Miracleman has to make a choice, and the Liz Moran's like, don't you dare go, but he doesn't even like listen to that, and he's gone. But not before we at least have like one or two more pages. Got to check in with little Johnny Bates, who's being reacclimated with the other children in the home, and Moore is doing everything he can to build up points for Johnny Bates, for you to like ultimately like sympathize with the boy.
When the moment like you're so fearing Kid Miracleman busting out of his prison, but then when the moment comes that he's about to bust out, you're cheering for him to bust out of his prison. It's such great manipulation.
And he builds it for like he has been essentially catatonic since like issue 3.
Yeah, it's a real steady drumbeat. This like slow build, like every comics creators in training take note. There's some lessons here.
And I wonder too if like it was one of those things that he was building for, that he could just like let loose whenever he felt like it. Like, you know what, I'm done now. Let's end this.
There's a character in Supreme that's waiting in the Phantom Zone, like Supreme's version of the Phantom Zone, and this character is called The End. And he's kind of like a Thanos kind of character, and he's like, and like all the villains in there are about to bust out, and they're like, come on, join us, come on. He's like, it isn't time yet. It's when I come out, it's the end. So it's like that. Wow. Yeah, he had that idea.
Is that Supreme stuff worth reading?
I love it. It's one of my favorites. I don't know. It's been a while since I read it, but I love it. It's one of my top comics.
I
to
plan on
check it
having
out.
this channel for quite a while, man. So like it'll have to be mined and covered at some point. I've never read that stuff.
It informs this stuff really. Like they talk to each other. Like these two works talk to each other. They resonate with each other.
Nice. Okay.
So when I talk about that crazy alien world, once again, Totleben could do it all. Not only can he build beautiful citadels, he's an architect, but he's also, character designer, sci-fi designer, can create the best otherworldly stuff that can compete with anybody. Ralph McQuarrie, anybody.
Yeah, it kind of starts out with like a bottle city of Candor kind
Right.
of thing, except they're like digital. They're like this miniature digital civilization that he's just kind of contemplating. And then we're back in the present, and there's this great transition of panels stacked next to each other that kind of slide over each other, and then suddenly now you're in these like huge halls, which kind of they feel like old time comics. They feel like Little Nemo. They feel like
Alex Raymond, Flash Gordon.
Yeah, they feel like Flash Gordon. They feel like the first year of Flash Gordon, with this like really like disciplined, minimalist use of perspective.
Yeah, Totleben is good with his sense of scale in these books.
So hard to do too, man.
Yeah.
Super hard to do. And so now Moore has to create warring alien civilizations. And it seems like as you read throughout, kind of like a methodology to accomplish this is to, like when you were a little kid, just pretend it's opposite day. So, draw the ugliest fucking thing you could ever imagine, and then everybody of that species is going to think that that's beautiful. Draw Bridget Nielsen, draw Madonna, and then those aliens thusly should think that she's an ugly piece of shit, and so on and so forth, man. Like, these two warring races, in opposite day, they're not even fighting, but they're certainly at war.
Yeah, it's a Cold War.
Yeah, and there's constant like, that's his shorthand. That's like the easy way for him to kind of like sell us on this other world, man.
Yeah, this is where I feel like Alan Moore's imagination is truly on display, is when he's like creating stuff like this, like alien races and like intergalactic politics and sort of things like that. This whole book is just like him riffing on like the superhero genre, but this is, and I don't know if he's like getting his ideas from some other science fiction source material, but this feels like really original to me.
Yeah.
I mean, again, like it's Captain Marvel, so you think of all the different Captain Marvels, and so to me, this like that's big like fish creature that's like they worship or is their leader or whatever. That's the Kree Supreme Intelligence. That like sort of all-powerful floating Oz head that direct, and maybe it's like the Kree and the Skrull or something, like.
Yeah.
But I think he is fusing those sort of trashy comics references with probably some other, like more esoteric things that he's reading. He's just
Right.
great at like just meshing everything together. And also, like we've just been reading the Miracleman issues, but there's. And the one of the cool things about those Marvel reprints is that they include all Alan Moore's Warpsmith stories. So if you kind of read those as you're reading it, these characters they come out of nowhere if you're reading it the way we're reading it, but they don't. He actually like builds some history. So he has been sort of priming the pump on those characters and developing those mythologies, parallel to what we're reading.
Were those stories in 2000 AD?
Yeah, they were in Warrior, yeah.
Oh, Warrior. Okay.
Yeah,
Yes.
they ran like concurrently with this. And there's one other story that like we can talk about when we get to like the big fight between him and Kid Miracleman. But there's a story that he did around the time of like issue 2 that kind of makes you jump into the future and into this final battle with Kid Miracleman and predicts all these things that are going to happen later on, and then also it gets hinted at in the actual like next to last issue. So yeah, it was this really interesting thing. Like it would be interesting to read the Warrior issues. You'd probably get a totally different experience of this work.
No doubt.
Definitely.
The intergalactic court case goes down. It's sort of unclear like how it resolved itself. I guess it like resolves itself in some alien way that we don't understand or something.
Yeah, it's like cosmic diplomacy. They come to like a compromise where
Is this where Miraclewoman says you guys should just all fuck?
right.
They question it.
Yeah.
They question it, and then we're like, "Hey, you're for as ugly as you are, like that's a smart idea."
Yeah.
And then the aliens like invite them to watch them all fuck.
Right. Yeah. Like your encounters between two societies can either be fanatic, destructive, or they can be erotic.
And creative.
Yeah, creative. So, yeah.
And then there's this sort of happens sometimes whenever I travel with the homies, man, and we have like there's sort of too much fun to be had like out on the road, man, when you travel to Germany or something like that. And there's the great Chris Rock stand-up special that has sort of we all benefited from, man, but Mike Moran could have used here, man. And Chris Rock says something like, "You can never let your lady know that you had a good time without her." You know, like if you're going somewhere, you could never let her go.
You said a fucking mouthful, because when Miracleman comes home and he's like, "I was just in outer space and I talked to this and she's like, do you think I give a fuck about you and your fancy friends?" It's like Alan Moore just went to his first like San Diego Comic-Con. He's like, and he comes home and he's telling Mrs. Alan Moore, "I met Will Eisner and I talked to Jack Kirby. I was on stage with Jack Kirby and I met Frank Miller." And she's like, "You think I give a fucking shit? Do you know the stuff I've had to put up with here while you and your fucking genius friends are out being fucking geniuses?" I'm telling you, that's what Alan Moore's writing about here.
He's like, and Mrs. Alan Moore's like, "While you were in San Diego, the water pump broke in our house, and all this other shit happened." Yes. But yeah, he comes back, and Liz doesn't even move her positioning. She's just like static, like a statue, just curled up and listening to him, and starts crying, and is like, "Yeah, I don't give a shit about your outer space adventures, and I have to bounce because I need to get away from you and our kid, because all of this is so crazy and unrelatable for me that I have to go." And also, you know, Liz realizes that the kid is having an effect on her emotional state and is able to kind of control things with her, which is also, I mean, could you imagine like you're a parent and your kid is able to manipulate you and fuck with your mind? Like, this is way more than what Liz signed up for when she started hanging out with Mike, you know.
I mean, kids do manipulate their parents, you know. They do fuck with their minds. It's like he is. I think he's taking like real world stuff again, like we've seen it previously, but taking real world stuff and just pushing it a little further into like sci-fi territory, into horror territory, into you know, superhero territory. Like it really is like a recipe for like a rich creative life, is to just kind of like take your life and then just kind of, you know, push it into some like, you know, amp it up a little bit, and you got something.
Yeah, that gives you plausible deniability after that thing sees print, and then you know the wife sees that after screaming at your head for going to San Diego Comic-Con for a week or whatever.
The colorist does a good job of like really making that scene really look drab by comparison to like the Interstellar scenes beforehand, are just like super saturated with color too.
Yeah,
agreed.
Totally, yeah. Especially since the double page spread before that was the monochromatic like panels of like red, orange, yellow, green, and then you get back to Earth and it's just like gray.
Yeah,
Earth tone, straight up you're on Tatooine, man.
Yeah,
barren desert type shit. Except, of course, you know, that blue and that red, like that's the only thing that's popping on those pages.
To me, this is like the phase where Alan Moore is systematically shedding Miracleman's like close relatives, like his wife, his counterpart, human counterpart, and then his daughter. Like in like 3 phases, they're like completely gone from his life.
Yeah, that Superman issue that you guys reviewed like a couple weeks ago. It's they kind of mentioned that. He mentions that in that story too, where it's like Toyman and the Prankster were like, oh, I was gonna go after Superman starting from his like most distant friend and work my way inward, but then I hit pay dirt with the first one, which was like Pete, whatever that guy's name Pete was, who knew like that Superman was Clark Kent, you know. But that idea, like you said, that it's almost like an onion of like layers of like, you know, here's the people in your life, and you know, the outer to the inner.
So then we hit Miracleman issue 14, and this is that one that has all sorts of Kama Sutra like posing and shit, with Miracleman dancing all over the place, reflecting on, you know, his life. The baby goes away. The Warpsmiths, you know, they let the Miracle family, you know, Miracle Woman, Miracle Man, let them know about like a long-standing tradition when we're sort of outed. You know, you're now gods amongst men. Now you have to find the other people with talent because that's just customary. You know, essentially, time to build a superhero team. We've handled all the superhero tropes.
Yeah, or a
so
pantheon, as the title is.
Yes.
And yeah, he's doing like an interpretive dance, which was like real big in the 80s, you know, this thing of like telling a story through dance. And again, like you said, that's also sort of like, I don't know, like a Hindu tradition, or like the idea that you can embody like the, you know, like the story of the universe in like different, you know, like subtle dance movements.
Yeah, I'm too much of a Pittsburgh boy, and I've never been to college, man. So I'm just watching this guy looking like a punk.
How do you guys feel about like the accompanying language with like all of the panels where he's dancing?
I'm dancing on my own. Only the gods are watching. There's like song lyrics.
I mean, to be honest, I think it's brilliantly written, but it doesn't really do much for me in terms of like enjoying this as a cohesive story where I kind of want to know what happens with the characters and where we're going next. You know,
Yeah,
I think Ellen has these moments in these issues where he's such an incredible writer. I feel like he can't not write this type of stuff. He just needs to get it out of his system. Like, he's so brilliant. But it's kind of like I said before, I'm always sort of waiting for the next scene of like, it sounds like me being an idiot, but it's like, I kind of want the character to be in the room with the characters again. I want to be with them and hear them talk because they're so interesting. And luckily this is remedied by, I totally found the conversation with Miracleman and his little infant daughter to be completely fascinating and bizarre and interesting and psychedelic, where she's fully conscious and aware, and she's like, okay, Dad, well, I'm going to go cruise around London for a little bit, fly around, and then I'm eventually going to get out of here and go learn in outer space with aliens and stuff, because this world doesn't really have much for me. So that's the stuff that I find most fascinating. What are your thoughts, man?
Yeah, Ben, you must be going somewhere.
I think for all the reasons that you just described, Jim, is the reason why I think that this writing is terrible. Like, this is awful. It's a slog to get through. Like, it makes zero sense a lot of the time. And it feels like this is what Alan Moore thinks is like really accomplished writing. But in actuality, it's just really, really difficult to read, and you get, like you said, nothing from it, and you just can't wait to get past it. For me, it's just like this is like more, I don't know what it is, but I picked up one of his novels one time, and I just started reading like the first page, and it read like this. And I think that this is like him. It's weird to me because it feels like an amateur's view of what great writing is, and I don't think it's like great writing at all. I think that this is, because writing to me is all about like communication, and I've read some books on writing, and I remember one saying like, writing is, you know, the hand that's holding your hand in the darkness, leading you like out of you know, a room where you don't understand anything. So like, to me, this is just like so confusing, and it like doesn't do anything to me other than just reveal Moore's sort of like ego or whatever
masturbation.
is going. Yeah,
Well,
it's just bizarre to me.
He's from a different generation with different values, different writing
True.
values. And like, yeah, you're talking about communication. That's like a value of like, our generation or whatever. His generation values impressing people, blowing people away with your technique and the crazy words you pull out of your ass. And this kind of writing that he's doing is so much fun to do. It's so much fun to write that way. If you're right, it is so much fun. I've done writing like that. It's so much fun. But like you said, it's comparable to masturbation. It's
Thinking about it in those terms of like being impressive, it makes me think of like a lot of his contemporaries in that context. Like I even think of our dear publisher Double G Gary Groth in some of those TCJ interviews, and sometimes even when you just talk to him in person, uses the word amanuensis or encomium and shit, and like I just shake my head and pretend I know what he just said to me. And then I like look it up in thesaurus.com whenever he ain't looking, just to make sure I ain't getting made fun of or something.
Think of like the sort of like the heroes of that genre. It would be like like Dick Cavett or something like those were like the shining lights. That era.
Was Dick Cavett impressive?
Well, he would like very like collegiate and with like sort of big words and kind of that kind of like that's like my dad's generation, and I just remember all the stuff he was into, and it was like it was like this kind of like that kind of writing. I'm sure he'd be like, oh, this comics are garbage, but this is good stuff right here.
It's the kind of thing that if I ever had the good fortune to sit in a room with Moore. Because he does this kind of thing often enough that I think you could ask him the question of like, why would you do like what is up with some of these tangents?
Yeah.
These like literary tangents, and I bet he would have like some explanation.
I mean, he might disavow a lot of it. I know he's disavowed sections of his work since that, so he might. I mean, this is a long time ago. He's a very different man. He might feel very differently about this. And I get the sense from this last batch that he's kind of in a little bit of a hurry. He wants to wrap this thing up.
Yeah,
because there's stories like how you were saying, Jim, about how you like when we're in the moment, but not when we're sort of in those kind of fancy little things. And it's like. It seems like he had a ton of story that he was planning to cover, like the stuff with the fire drake and all these things, and he's just like rushing through it. Like I don't really get, okay, the fire drake, what's so important about it? How's this guy fit? Like it seems like there was a bigger story to tell, but he's just like kind of giving us the bullet points now because he wants to end this work that he started 6 years ago that he's like fucking tired of, and he just wants to be done with it. He promised an ending, and so he wants to get the ending so he can get on with his life and do big numbers, or whatever.
Right.
I was
thinking. Glad.
Go ahead, Jim.
I'm sorry, Ed.
No, please go.
I was just going to say, in wrapping that up, I am glad you brought that up, Ben, because it seems blasphemous and wrong to say anything about Alan Moore. It just, but at the same time, it's like, well, no, we're critiquing a work, and we're intelligent guys that can talk about this stuff. But this is obviously a brilliant piece, and he's a genius. But I'm glad that you brought it up, because rereading this today, I had that thought of like some of these scenes of just the narration with the drawings. It's like, I don't know, I could almost do without some of this stuff. So it's something worth talking about, and I think we all addressed it in like the proper way.
Yeah, I mean, he's so good at like the other scenes. I mean, when you come out of those scenes, it's like so readable. Everything is so readable, and you're just reading the Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow issues. Those are like so pleasurable just to read his words on the page, and just at moments in this, I think it just sort of feels like, man, I really don't want to be reading this.
Right.
Yeah, I'm working on the audio version of Jerusalem as I ink comics.
Are you really?
60 hours of book, and
I thought it would be more.
There's there's a lot of that kind of stuff in there, man.
Yeah, God bless you for undertaking that journey.
Yeah. The second it's no fun, I'll be done. But it's like it almost works in the same way where there's the masturbatory stuff that's just like these incongruent like poems, and then the story bits will happen, and the story bits are good, and it's like, oh, I see where we're going. This is cool. And then I read enough interviews where I sort of know what he's building to. Anyway, I digress, man. We got a lot of Miracleman to talk about.
So, talking about like good scenes, we got the death of Michael Moran, that double page of like a silent sequence.
He shed his family. The daughter has went off and done her thing. Liz Moran, she took a spell with the family. They reconvened, and she's like, nah, fuck you. I'm not ready to get back with you, man. Forget about it. Okay, yeah, that's not quite that part where he revisits her. So he's able to shed his human life. Says, Komoda, writes a little note,
takes off all his clothes, so he's like not this like god anymore. Now he's like an ape. He's like just this hairy animal.
This page almost has some connections to Kubrick's 2001 opening scene. There's something primal about it, the way it's shot, the drawings, and I mean, John's rendering on these nature scenes is so good. Like I was analyzing these pages today. Like, this is all pen and ink, man. This is fucking crazy stuff. It's really good stuff. Incredible comics.
Yeah. Hard to compare when it comes to the art duties, man. And you know what? Lucky for everybody that he really only did have 17 pages an issue or something, man. Because then you can take that time and make the stuff look as you wish.
He might be one of the best background artists in comics.
Yeah, and it's great storytelling too, because like on the left side you have Mike Moran at the bottom in this like lush green, verdant, mountainous thing, and then on the far right is like Miracleman up in the air in this like almost like desolate moon-like, night dead terrain. Like it's just really great.
Yeah, these are thinking creators, man. They're just not putting pencil to paper and being willy-nilly about their shit, man. But I think we've talked about that part enough.
Yeah.
We got to get to the release of Kid Miracleman, and it comes with some adolescent rape scenes, man, where young Johnny Bates is about to be overpowered by a bunch of bullies, and one of them is gonna have his way as violently as possible with the boy, and the boy's hurting.
And this is the moment where you're like, Kid Miracleman, come on, Kid Miracleman, bust that, that's the end of the world. It's like he sets up such sort of like a dire, like bad situation where you're like really like feeling bad for Johnny Bates, and you want somebody to rescue him, even if it's Satan that's rescuing him.
It's such a brutal scene in only 6 panels. It's so fucking brutal, and it's not even one whole page. Like it's almost like this is where Alan Moore wants to like release the dude, but he doesn't want to like spend too much time on that. The kid's being hurt, and he's even like almost pleading with him to stop just so that he doesn't have to do what he's about to do. And when he releases Kid Miracleman, once again, that all-white panel.
Yeah, and I don't think it's ever been this white, where, like, before there would be some drawing elements in the panel, there'd maybe be a pair of hands. Here, it's just a white rectangle.
No, pure white.
Yeah.
Pure white on the Eclipse version.
That's brilliant, man.
Well, I mean, in the previous one, in, like, the previous times where there have been white transformation sequences, they'd always have, like, a pair of hands, or this, or maybe some zip lines in the end. This is just a white rectangle. Like, it doesn't get more basic comics than that. This is, like, a pre-comic.
What's amazing is like that there's nothing there, and yet it's like the most terrifying panel. Like there's absolutely nothing. It's all about the panels that precede it and come after it. But it's like this is how you do it right when you want to save your artist some time.
Because you're not looking at it like, oh, here's an empty rectangle. You're like, oh, I'm blind,
Yeah, totally. Yeah. This is the best empty rectangle in comics.
And the preceding stuff is all that hyper detailed background work and
Totally.
elaborate storytelling that we all were just talking about. So now there's more air, and now Kid Miracleman is loose. And when you saw the storytelling of these boys fucking Kid Miracleman up, or Johnny Bates, and about to pull that trip on him, there's 3 kids, and one of them is walking away. Like, he's not exactly participating, so, but he's not stopping either. And those 2 kids dispatched pretty quickly, and the one boy who walked away, he's not going to be spared. And neither is the one nurse who was nice to Kid Miracleman. I think it echoes an earlier issue, like whenever
the secretary.
He walked away, came back, and
Yeah, he's like, you were nice to me, I'm going to spare you. He walks around the corner, then he comes back, and she's like, thank you, Jesus. And then he comes back around the corner, and he's like, if word got out about this, I think people would think I was, going soft. And then, yeah.
Man, that's a good page.
Yeah, all the stuff that we've been saying, we want more of. This is what it is, like where you're just
it.
in the moment, simple words and pictures that mesh beautifully.
Well, fellas, man, I don't think we're going to get much poetry in this next issue when we start to talk about Miracleman number 15, and which is regarded whenever people talk about, Wizard Magazine talks about superhero fights. This is always pretty much the top, 1 or 2.
This was the most expensive superhero fight. If you wanted to own this comic, I never got my hands on this actual comic. I had to wait for the reprints.
Yes. Yeah, it's the one that made you have to go find PDFs, man. And but it wasn't always the case. In our Wizard coverage, we would check out the Miracleman section. And for 50 issues, it's $2.
Oh, man.
Yeah. They cover it in a good and cheap one time, and then after that, it's over.
The cover to issue 15 is my favorite of the whole series. Like, there's not any other comic book cover quite like this. Like, this imagery is so crazy and fucked up and enticing, and it's mesmerizing in a way. It's just like absolute carnage, beautifully drawn, incredible line work, and design and composition of it. It's just, I couldn't imagine being in a comic shop and seeing this on the rack like the day it came out, like next to whatever other superhero comics were coming out. Like, there's Batman, and then there's this. Like, what is this?
It also has a narrative element. It tells a story.
Yes.
Like, it's dripping with narrative, and it's also like a great first panel after the previous issue, where we know that if you've been reading these in sequence, that Kid Miracleman is loose, and now you see this, and you're like, all right, the worst thing has happened in the world, and now we're seeing evidence of its
this
of
is
the consequence
what we were trying
of this.
to prevent.
Yeah, right, and here it is, and Miracleman's face is completely it looks like acid has been thrown on it. It's insane. It's a really terrifying cover.
And it looks like a severed head. If you look closely, you see it's attached.
Totally.
It just reads as a severed head.
Yeah.
And it's a cover done by the interior artist too. So that kind of that's why maybe some of the previous covers didn't quite work. This is somebody who knows this thing inside and out doing the cover.
Totally.
But yeah, we have this Hieronymus Bosch hellscape of and Moore put a ton of thought into okay, what are the most nightmarish images I can come up with? And this again, it's this is more Lovecraft. This is more horror than superhero. It's flayed skins of entire human beings hanging on a clothesline, instead of the laundry.
The horror in this is so inventive. I don't think I've seen anything like these images. Moore's imagination is just amazing here.
I wonder if it's 100% Moore, because it makes me feel like a little bit of Bizarro World version of Will Elder Chicken Fat, where the idea was, how many jokes and gags can I fit per square inch? What if in that script, Alan Moore is we're going anti-chicken fat, man, and it's in every square inch what atrocity can you put in there? So when you look at those flayed skins, man, there's a little mangled up tricycle that implies certain things.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, there's a ton of space that's being filled here. And yeah, you can only write so much. But I do, like, I have such a clear picture in my mind of Alan Moore, right? Like, you know, imagine human flesh being hung out as if it were the day's laundry. You know, like, it seems like, you know, and it's like almost the starting image, like that one in particular. But yeah.
and you look at it, it's a family. It's like,
right, it's
like
mom, dad, and the kid.
Yeah, what's the most fucked up thing about this is like how telling this is of Kid Miracleman's character. He's like he's not taking any of this seriously. Like, this is like all a joke to him, you know, like he's hanging up flesh on clotheslines because it's funny to him, you know. It's like super fucking scary.
Yeah. Well, the bad guys, if you can call them that, in this book, in this series, Gargunza and Kid Miracleman, they're, like I said earlier, they're truly terrifying, warped, fucked up people. You know, they're not just like costume super villains that are trying to take over the world. There's something else going on with these characters, something deeper and more sinister.
It was a great move of Moore to make Kid Miracleman the bad guy, because then we know it's not like some other superhero whose powers we don't sort of understand or can't comprehend, but we know that Kid Miracleman's basically got the same powers as Miracleman. So we've seen all of Miracleman's sort of godlike powers on display. So the only match for him is somebody of his own ilk, you know?
Yeah, and Kid Miracleman is kind of like the perfect, like, Mordred to Miracleman's Arthur. Because it is like, he views Miracleman as his father, as like a father figure. And so he has all this, like, the hatred of, like, you know, the young new, you know, the new man, you know, has to his dad.
It's always that scary moment, and a lot of young comic readers remember the moment where when you're in elementary school and you get into a fight and you get punched, it stings. But then puberty happens and you could become stronger than your dad and immature as fuck. And then when you punch a guy, you could like break his orbital bone in his skull and shit. You know what I'm saying, man? And it's like, that's what it reminded me of, man, because I knew a bunch of big muscular knuckleheads who were throwing their weight around like 5-year-old kids, man, but they could cause real damage. You know what I'm saying, man?
Right.
Yeah, I mean, like Johnny Bates, he is sort of like the teenager. Like he's psychotic, but has like the abilities of a grown up.
Exactly. Exactly, man. And you know, it's page after page of atrocity, like really great spreads. I defy you to you know, try to calculate the body count on these pages, because you will always find one more body just hanging out of a window or something, man.
Yeah, we were talking about like, how Liz sort of unceremoniously exits the comic, but I just realized now Alan Moore got her out of London so that she's not one of the victims, so she can sort of live, and you can sort of be like, oh, well, how come she wasn't killed by, or why wasn't she caught? You know, she can kind of be spared the atrocities. And Miracleman talks, I mean, Kid Miracleman, like he mentions in this, like, how many people do I have to kill before you start paying attention to me? So there's like some of that too, like a tantrum to like get daddy's attention.
We mentioned in previous episodes and earlier in this particular episode the sense of scale that Totleben's able to get across in the imagery, and he's using it to very nefarious effect here, man. Just showing all of the shock and damage.
He is so good at like drawing, rendering the destruction of this city. That is also a tall order for an artist to get across. Like, and he does it really, really well. Every single time I look at this, I'm like, this is amazingly well done. And a lot of it's done with shadow, but he's just so good at like pulling out the right details, and but you just really get a sense of like total decimation.
Yeah, it's one thing to be good at drawing architecture, but then to have to draw destroyed architecture, rubble, all this stuff deconstructed, and so many different texture techniques that he's employing here with just ink, just lines on paper. He's and after seeing the original page that you sent us, Ben, from the Miracleman Artist Edition, he does use a lot of white into black ink. Like he likes to splatter with ink or with white and add white back in. And I can kind of figure out where he's doing that at times. But there's other times where some of his textures that I'm not even quite sure what he's doing, but it's to great effect. It's awesome.
And if you're from London, I'm sure these like different like buildings and monuments that they throw at Miracleman probably mean a lot more than they do to us, where they're just kind of like these cool details. But like he drops the Bank of London on him along with all its debt and accumulated cash and stuff like this. It's just like really cool ideas. I wonder like the equivalent version of Pittsburgh or if you're going to do this for like a city you're like intimately familiar with.
Now for all of book 3 of Miracleman, we would have these framing sequences with Miracleman in the future, so we know he's okay. It was actually like when you have such a big fight like this. We've read a million superhero comics. We know that the guy's going to be fine. And Moore builds that in at the very beginning. He survived this,
right?
So we already knew that. No need to even try to figure that part out. Who's going to live? Who's going to die, or whatever. But they're going to remind us. Moore reminds us here that he is in the future, and he did survive this thing. So there's like that 2 or 3 page sequence where they kind of like disappear with one another in some kind of explosion, and different sects of new religions kind of like have their own version of what transpired to get them to the place they kind of like ended up.
Yeah,
fun touch.
This is
that's great.
There was a story, the Yesterday Gambit, that ran in like an earlier issue where it establishes Solitude, his like little like Fortress of Solitude in the sea. That's sort of this like depressed version of this Fortress of Solitude. And then it established all the stuff that happens in these 2 pages are referenced in a thing that happened in issue 2. It's kind of like Savage Dragon or something, when he like flashes forward to like his son and stuff, and then eventually the story catches up to that. That's what that was. So it explains what they're like, and it's very comic booky. They're sort of Miracleman and the Warpsmith, they go back in time to like accumulate energy to like shoot at Kid Miracleman. So they have Miracleman fight his 1954 version of himself, and then they capture that energy, and then they go to 1963 and he fights his 1963 version of himself, and then they capture that, and then it's like, okay, we got enough energy to like throw at Kid Miracleman, and then they come back to, and so you see all of that when the Miracleman comic has only been running, the Alan Moore one has only been running for like a couple issues. So you're like, oh, all this crazy stuff's going to be happening so I think some of the weird decisions that Alan Moore makes are sort of corners that he painted himself into with that one, because it does reference the Fire Drake, and it does reference Solitude, and it does reference, oh, it's a shame what happened with Liz, and so he kind of, created like his own sort of like end point.
That's fine, man.
Interesting.
Robert Downey Jr. was just on the Joe Rogan podcast, and he was describing that the Marvel writers, like, they are masochists, and they love to write themselves into like a tight spot that they then have to put a lot of like mental energy into writing their way out of, and that seems pretty close to an example of that. And Ben, I said, well, Ben, you got a lot of those master classes, David Mamet and Sorkin, all those guys. They describe that in those exact moments where you have no idea how to get out of it or what happens next, you are now a writer. Like, it is now time to dig deep, put on the game jersey, and figure it out.
Right. Yeah. That's like a method, or like a way of working that a lot of writers sort of swear by, is like, you got to write your characters into like these impossible sort of situations, and then try to see how the characters figure their way out, because like if you've written the character well enough, and you know the character well enough, they're going to like have some sort of response to like a crisis situation. That's part of the fun of like, I guess, being a writer.
Yeah, and the writer's journey kind of follows the hero's journey of the story you're writing. You're like, oh man, how do I get out of this one? As the character is saying, how the fuck do I get out of this one?
Yeah.
I like that one thing you said about Kirby back in the day, man, like where he just said that like any one of his characters can defeat any of the other characters. Like, you know, Jimmy Olsen can
beat Darkseid.
Right.
He just has to figure out how to do it.
Yeah.
You know, and that's like when you see Frank Miller have, you know, Batman defeat Superman. It's like, you know, I think of that, you know. And Alan Moore, like in the verbiage and stuff, it's like, what kind of sick fuck comes up with all these ways of hurting people? And it's like, it's you. Yeah. You're the sick fuck. Like he writes that knowing that I am the sick fuck who's coming up with, you know, skin on a clothesline. You know?
Right.
Yeah.
And it's so funny that this comes out in like 86, 87, and that you know, Death of Superman is years away. So like, you know, Dan Jurgens and those guys could have sat on this comic and like taken some notes, because this is a superhero battle, man. You look at that thing, it is Superman, you know, versus Doomsday is plastic. You know, it's so silly and artificial when you look at this comic and think of, you know, this other thing that sold 4 or 5 million copies.
Even though we know that Miracleman survives this fight, while you're reading this comic, you're like, it's up in the air as to like how he's able to survive this fight. You still feel like he's totally outmatched. Like you feel the threat of death. It's pretty amazing.
You know, those framing sequences where it's like him writing in his silver book, he could reach a point where he goes like this to his hair, and then you see it's black underneath, and we've actually been watching Kid Miracleman writing the diary the whole time, you know, like
or I mean, it could be Yoda, you know, it could be like there's this like terrible force that, and I fought him, and it overpowered me,
and here I am in heaven,
and I'm in a satellite now. I'm in where, you know, Green Lantern chills out, you know, because
the entire world's gone.
Yeah, like I can't even do anything on Earth anymore.
I mean, ultimately, in the end, Miracleman isn't the one that even is able to truly defeat Kid Miracleman.
Right.
Well, he does. I mean, in a very important way, he is, because he delivers the coup de grace. You know, he does, and the stroke that is like the unkindest cut of all, where like he has to, you know, snap the neck of this. You know, this little boy who was like a son to him once upon a time, who he has all, you know, all the affection of their younger days. Like that's who he's, you know, he doesn't karate chop, you know, the miracle monster's head off. He's karate, you know, he's,
and
you know.
And when it's like Moore is such a sick bastard too, because when Johnny turns back into his human form, he writes that kid in you know, a half dozen word balloons as such a believable little boy, so empathetic towards the kid. He'll just keep getting out. He'll just keep doing it and doing it and doing it. It's like, I have nieces and nephews who throw tantrums, and we'll talk like that, repeated phrases, all that kind of shit. And it's like, oh, it feels too legit.
Yeah, I mean, he's a master, you know.
Yeah,
and this is a master work.
You feel the weight of the emotion in the moment. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah. All made even more disturbing by the fact that I didn't notice this until rereading it, but the last time we saw Johnny in human form, he was in the restroom about to be raped, and his pants were around his ankles.
Oh, right.
And when we see him again before his death here, he's pantsless. His pants are around his ankles, and you have this disturbed, fucked up, poor little kid, pantsless, with Miracleman. Miracleman is just like, well, you know, here we go, and breaks his neck, and then is holding this kid on the last page, and it's just like, shit, man, this is like deep, disturbing storytelling happening here. This is beyond comics. This is there's some whole other thing going on here. You know,
Yeah, this is like the era of like slasher movies and stuff, but then like slasher movies kind of evolved out of like the Vietnam War and like like disturbing news footage, like the
Combat
footage.
photography
Yeah, it was a
and
lot less censored than it is now. So it's like that's we're kind of seeing like sort of like a realistic portrayal of war. Like how different is this from war? From like the effects of war.
I always thought that Miracleman snapped the neck of, I guess it's Johnny Bates, but now just reading it, I think he actually punches his head into, like, he obliterates his head,
collapses it,
into
itself,
right? Because he draws up into a fist, and then like in the final panel on page 18, he's like extending his left arm, and there's blood splattering up onto him. And then like the next page, Johnny Bates doesn't have a head anymore. But I always thought it was
even more disturbing, even more upsetting.
Yeah, I mean,
I thought it was. I thought it was a broken neck situation as well. But now, just rereading it, I mean, you notice new things reading this story all the time.
This whole issue is like, like a worst case scenario. This is like a dystopia. This is end of the world. This is war. These are the effects of war. This is like whatever's the opposite of dystopia, I guess. This is like the worst case scenario for planet Earth. And then the very next issue, we're going to see Utopia.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and let's jump into that now. But before we do, I just want to say that the superhero fight, that's the memorable thing whenever people talk about the entire Alan Moore Miracleman body of work. It's like, issue 15. Upon this reread, my issue is 16. Like, this thing is fucking incredible. Down to I love the couple paragraphs.
Yeah, me too. I was going to say,
prose.
yeah, and this sort of thing would be a total turnoff to me ordinarily, but like, yeah, it's great. It's great, and talking about them like burning their comic books and
what's that that book called Super Folks?
Super Folks,
yeah, like it's like his version of that, like right here, man. But ultimately, like this book, like this epilogue, whatever you want to call it, the way the cherry on top is essentially a story of like, what if Superman won? What if Superman got his way?
Yeah,
exactly. And here we are, ... ellipsis. And what do you have, man?
Yeah, this is like John Lennon's Imagine, where like this is like Alan Moore saying like, imagine, like, this is how I would solve all the world's problems. These are my solutions. This is how I want to see things go on planet Earth. Like, that's how get rid of governments, get rid of money, break things down into smaller, smaller, more manageable units. It's just like one by one.
He gets really. It's amazing how granular he gets. Like the detail and like, it's one thing to sort of say, Superman takes over the world and he makes it a paradise, but how do you do it? And then it's cool. It also is consistent with like his Miracleman sort of lens, where it's like, actually, how would you really step by step go about solving the world's problems as a superhero god sort of equivalent, and that the notes about like Charles Manson, and then even how like the human beings react to like these changes, but then how Miracleman then reacts to the reaction. It's really well conceived.
Yeah. A lot of brain equity went into this, man, and he also made sure that he saved the page where he could punk down Margaret Thatcher, which was one of his a trope of 1980s Alan Moore for sure.
Oh, for sure, yeah. And speaking of Superman, you guys, this entire issue is Alan Moore just doing a way better version of that absolutely terrible Superman 4 movie where he gets rid of the nuclear arms and then Nuclear Man is born or whatever. It's a fucking horrible movie. But this version of that, superheroes getting rid of nukes, and this is the way it's done correctly. You know what I'm saying? Like, only Alan Moore can do something as almost obvious and silly as that, but then pull it off with gusto. He
pulls off like real world analogs to some of the stuff he's playing with here. The stuff that I am thinking of is like in the future compared to where the story was written, and I wonder what like his modern day analogs would have been for some of the things like he cures certain diseases or something like that, and there are protesters who are like, well, maybe they want to be that way or something like that, and like in the 90s when like the cochlear implant was invented, and now like deaf people can now hear, and parents are like getting those for their little kids. Like there's like segments of people, and it's not as bad as like anti-vaxxers, but there's people who are like, well, they're deaf, and that's who they are. Like they're making that decision, like not to
like as culture associated with it.
not to get the implants and stuff. And there are those moments here. So it's like in 1987, like what could he have been pulling from for those kinds of pieces, man? Because or maybe the earpiece was invented back then or something.
I mean, there were like there are always people who are sort of like distrustful of medicine, and there are like some like valid reasons, just based on some things that have happened historically where
thalidomide or something.
So and he's creating like a modern day basically Greek pantheon, like right down to like he's also sort of cured death. He's created like an afterlife and a river Styx and a dark god to sort of rule over these like ghosts who've been like brought back from the other side, and he does it in sort of a somewhat credible way. We're in like total fantasy land, but like you said, that granular approach, he kind of gets us there in these like little steps that seem kind of matter of fact.
Eugenics. Eugenics is a topic of discussion, and makes perfect sense when we're dealing with the Ubermensch.
Yeah, that is because like this is sort of like a perfect utopia. There's not too much here I could disagree with, but then it's like he sort of comes out in this sort of like caped, very martial uniform, and the eugenics and things. It does. Like those are the holes that Moore starts poking in his own utopia.
Yeah.
Of like, it is kind of taking on a sinister,
fascist
and like there's this
society.
small number of people who decide who gets this and who gets that, and what happens if, they're nice up to this point. What happens if that changes, or if somebody new comes into the mix? All these new superheroes are being minted every day. What if they're not all on the same page? And
you see the moments, man. Like the Thatcher moment is a very poignant piece, man, where she has free will, wants to make a decision about a political decision, and Miracleman, the Ubermensch, gives her a sideways glance. And she's totally powerless and shuffles out of the scene, man. Compound that with every other human being that these superheroes would, encounter that have any kind of free thought outside that, that deviates from the norm.
Yeah.
What year did this issue drop?
I think 87.
Okay. So it was after Watchmen?
It's after Watchmen, yeah.
Yeah, because there's like a couple of things that sort of feel like Watchmen in here, where he's talking about nuclear responses to Miracleman from Russia and how they sort of decide against it. That I was like, that seems like a parallel idea to like Watchmen. Also, this sort of led me to believe that maybe Top 10 is actually the future world where everybody is a superhero.
That's smart,
right,
dude.
Yeah.
Yes, I think that's smart, man.
I mean, there's no connection, I don't think.
Right.
If I'm remembering Top 10 correctly, there's no like connection to like a first superhero or anything like that.
Yeah, like the end of this, it's kind of like, okay, where do you go from here? The story's over. Maybe that's why Alan Moore didn't do anymore. But you can kind of think of like different ways the story could go, and I'm sure Moore did, and that being a natural place for it to go. Of like, okay, what's this world that's chock full of superheroes look like?
Right.
Yeah, lots of parallels to Watchmen, like you said, including scenes of absolute desolation with dead bodies strewn about cities as the climactic ending to basically the stories. You know what I mean? Yeah. Watchmen doesn't have this utopian build-up to it. And also characters like Dr. Manhattan and Miracleman's daughter that are superpowered beings that seem a bit indifferent to humanity. They're like, well, I tried to help humanity, and now I don't know what else to do, so I'm just going to go off into space. You know, this idea of like, not every superpowered person would put on a leotard and go out and save the world. Some would realize that humanity is confusing and complicated and maybe is beyond saving. So I like that idea of introducing that into these, superpowered characters. Miracleman is more of a idealistic, like ultimate character of like, no, we're going to bring utopia to Earth. Almost like whether Earthlings like it or not, like we're just going to do this. So
and Liz Moran is in the or not camp.
Yes,
right.
He goes to see her, man. And is just like offering her, like everything on a silver platter.
Yeah.
You could be a god just like me. I'm so perfect. You're so flawed. You could be just like me, and we could have things just to, all your problems will be solved, man.
He's saying you can be part of my 3-person marriage.
Right.
She's like, oh, right. So you and Super Tart or whatever, Miracle Monroe. She calls it.
Yeah.
Moore does a really good job of like showing Miracleman's attempt or his like, he wants to be connected to humanity in like some weird way, and then the other side is sort of like his detachment from humanity, like he just doesn't understand them at all either. And then you have Miracle Woman, who's just like, why are you even bothering, trying to like communicate with these people? Like, we're just here to like shepherd them,
Right. The design and artistic decision making on Totleben's part on the page with Miracleman talking to Liz, where we don't even see her full face.
Yeah.
She's just cut off at the nose, and we have small panels in a white void showing just how separated the two of these characters are. There's no warmth between them. There's nothing really. It's just a profile shot of her, and we don't even get to see her full face for one last time.
Yeah, it's like this all this stuff you're saying, Mike, Miracleman. It's not about me. It's about you. Like he's fully in frame the whole time, and and as soon as she's like, yeah, that's not like that. That's not what I want. Then he's like, okay, I tried. See you.
Yeah.
Yeah, he does that Ray Liotta thing whenever he shows up at the house and the mom and the wife are there shouting at him and stuff, and he just turns around, gets right back in the car, man. Sayonara.
Comparing this to Watchmen, it like more seems to suggest that almost like this like catastrophe is like a necessary step towards utopia. That you have to have this like near brush with extinction to galvanize everybody to create this brave new world.
Yeah, you superhero comics, man. You got to have some stakes. Got to take it someplace. But another Watchmen piece is that page you're looking at right there, man. A superhero fuck scene with little metaphors for ejaculation. Like he did a little bit of that in Watchmen with Night Owl and Silk Spectre.
Yeah, this again is like the "Can you read my mind" sequence in Superman, which is supposed to kind of like symbolize, fucking in the sky with a superhero. And here's like, okay, this is the real thing.
Whenever you see the Night Owl Silk Spectre fuck scene in the Zack Snyder movie, and then you see that little gout of flame.
I laughed out loud.
It's ridiculous, man.
It's amazing.
It is so cool.
Now, Ed, I have a specific question for you. What are your thoughts about Big Ben being renamed the British Bulldog?
Yeah, man, that's some kayfabe shit.
I mean, wasn't the WWF character
for sure
already established before? Maybe Alan Moore is not a wrestling guy. Probably not. But.
Yeah, I would bet not, man. But if he is, it takes on a sinister tone, because the British Bulldog tag team, they had a little pet bulldog named Matilda, and this British Bulldog is wearing Matilda on his head.
Oh.
Yes.
Like a mink.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, like Moore's doing all his kind of favorite stuff. He's like kind of like, okay, I'm making this Greek pantheon, so we need a Hercules, we need a demigod, so that'll be, Big Ben as this new like Hercules instead of a lion. Yeah, he's got the Matilda on his head, and then Alan Moore seems to like love caped super dogs. They show up in like all his things, and so here's the caped Superdog.
They, like the British dudes when they came to America and revolutionized DC Comics, they did have that remove, and we're sitting here in the room with like 10,000 fucking comics, man, and it's like a forest for the trees issue. And those British guys were able to look at our stuff from a little point of remove and like ask more questions about these characters and see them in a different way. And I think that that's something that you need to like to get to this kind of place. You have to be objective.
I mean, at this time, DC Comics had just said no more super dogs with capes. They had just erased that from their history. And then Alan Moore's like, in like 1986 or 85, and then Alan Moore's like, gimme, gimme, gimme. Like, okay, you don't want them? I'll take them, and I'm going to go to town with them.
Right. And super babies.
Super babies, yeah. That's like the cherubs of this, like, classical pantheon. The super babies.
But if there's anyone's interpretation of those tropes that I want to see, it would be Alan Moore's. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no doubt.
He's going to do it the best way, and he's got like the best artists to bring these visions to life. So
he just has such a deft hand at it. I think with a lot of people, a lot of the chatter that you hear about in like comics criticism from the fan perspective these days. What they're not able to articulate, or they take like an extreme position, is it's about bad writing. And in a lot of mainstream comics, it's like these comics have been made forever, dealing with all sorts of issues and stuff. It's just motherfuckers suck at it. Mm-hmm. But the people who criticize certain people, like, they're not going far enough, because almost all of those comics fucking suck.
Yeah, they're landfill. They're suitable for landfill.
Ballast.
Yeah, I mean, like all the stuff that Moore is inspired by, this like Superman stuff, you could like pick and there are such a small, and one of the ones is almost like a parallel to this is one of the times in a Superman comic where they said, okay, he's superpowered, how's he going to fix the world? And that was like that Superman Red Blue comic that came out in the 60s, where like it's like this imaginary novel, which Alan Moore is like very fond of that form, and solve all the world's problems and create a utopia. One of the few like really good like readable comics from those like decades and decades and decades, almost a century of comics, of Superman comics that are almost uniformly garbage.
Yeah. Before and since.
Yes. To date.
Yes.
Do you guys think that like any superhero comics have risen to the height of Miracleman, like since it's come out?
I mean, everybody's been trying. It seems like this is like that's really important work to creators. Maybe not so much to like the general fan, but it's very important to creators. And I think that's like what the sort of like Quesada era of Marvel has been like, trying to take lessons from this. And you could say they've succeeded spectacularly in this, like, these movies that we're seeing now,
like the Mark Millar Civil War gimmicks.
And Mark Millar specifically has like taken lessons from like he's created comics that are direct analogs. Like I think he did some comics. I get these teams mixed up, but like Authority. Right. Where it's like, okay, we're going to take over the government and we're going to solve all the world's problems. Like he's done these like exact tropes. So I think it's been hugely inspirational, and maybe too inspirational to this era that we're still in. This is an ancient comic. This is a comic from 1987, and like they're still following this blueprint. Maybe it's time to like sort of move on to something different.
When you would read interviews subsequent to the Watchmen, to that grim and gritty era, with Frank Miller, with Alan Moore, with Dave Gibbons, they all say the same thing, and they demonstrated this in their work, where the next stuff they wanted to do more like lighter, airier stuff. If in this one video interview that I have with Gibbons, he said that the project that he and Moore were fixing to work on It wasn't the Twilight of the Superheroes. It was going to be a Captain Marvel story.
Like a cheerful, happy Captain Marvel.
Yeah. And
basically, the anti-Marvel man.
Yeah. It's just they're supremely creative people, but that business is designed. It's a commercial business, mainstream comics, and if there isn't something to point to that is a moneymaker, then it's going to be more of the same, because this is the tried and true, and it requires somebody with some gumption to like take those chances. It's going to have to happen with a turd of a book. You're going to have to take something that is on its last legs, turn it around, and then that will then become a template, and people are going to bust on it. Honestly, like with the landscape of comics we have right now, with it just across the board, or at least like let's say in the independent space, cartoonists, with the New York publishers and stuff, I see only motherfuckers chasing one of two kinds of dollars, man. Little kid dollars with young adult or like tween books, or this is a book about ...
the history.
Yeah. I did the hip hop comic. I'm as guilty as anybody, but like the shit I'm working on right now, it's like I'm doing everything I can to try to make a quality piece that is brutal. It's almost like trying to convince them that like you'll be able to make money doing something other than those two things, fucking small, myopic, genres or whatever.
Yeah.
Or demographics that you're trying to chase.
Yeah, and I mean, the type of book you're doing is, that's my personal favorite type of book from a creator, where it's like, doesn't have to be all ages, doesn't have to be this, that, or the other. It can just be one creator's specific, unique vision. But that's not necessarily where our pop culture's at right now. But it's good to know that that people are out there still doing it.
There's the Wayne Gretzky thing, man. Go where the puck is going, not where it already has been. So it's like we know where it is, we know where it's been, but in order to like prosper, you got to be an outlier, man. You got to do a little something different. And frankly, us hanging out here, right here on YouTube, pretty much some of the only cartoonists on the thing. This is like an outlying endeavor in a fashion, at least in terms of like getting your shit out there, promoting, get your face out there, all of that, man. All this stuff has value. Are there any final notes about this Miracleman work, or can we wrap this up in a bun?
You could go on forever, but one of the lines that always sticks out to me in this is when one of the papers refers to them as super liberals.
Yeah.
So good.
Yeah. I would say in conclusion, man, it was just an absolute blast and a pleasure to discuss this incredible work with you guys. And obviously, Alan Moore is a genius. Most of the art throughout the series has been great. John Totleben is my personal favorite. I think it ends visually with such a bang with his work. And literally, like these last 3 pages, the double-page spread of the Miracleman Fortress, Citadel, whatever you want to call it, and the very last page of him sitting, contemplating the future. It ends on such a high mark for me, and by that I also mean visually, obviously, too, because the work is just, I could just look at it over and over and over again. Really incredible.
Are we all concurrently working on comics throughout the week, and before we record these episodes?
Yes.
Yeah.
I don't know about you fellas, man, but revisiting this work and having the discussions with you guys about the things that we've been discussing, when we microscopically look at each of these pages at such a tiny level, I'm applying things to my work directly. The work day begins after I wake up tomorrow. Then the work week begins. I immediately have, a lot of the stuff that you guys lay down in mind when I start to compose my next week's set of pages. So it's a big pleasure having these discussions with you guys. I want to keep it going. If you guys are good with that, man, we'll choose another more project, man, and keep things rocking.
Absolutely.
Let's do it.
Yeah.
Cool. So let's give some plugs and get the heck out of here, man. So Mahfood, why don't you start it off?
Yes, Jim Mahfood on Instagram and Twitter. Our Kickstarter for the pop-up book just launched, and you can get that at popupfunk.com.
Nice. Benjamin.
BenjaminMara.com. Search for me on Instagram and Twitter. Find my books online at Fantagraphics, Amazon, and in stores at cool comic shops.
January 29th, the week that we're filming this, but probably the past by the time you've seen this, Fantastic Four Grand Design Treasury Edition comes out. The whole story, all in one volume. And then Free Comic Book Day, Jack Kirby, The Epic Life of the King of Comics, published by 10 Speed Press. And you can follow me on Twitter at Tom Sholey, on Instagram at Tom_Sholey.
I want to give shouts to Nicholas DiMinno, who's been doing a lot of the editing duties on the Read More Comics episodes. Shouts to him. Nicholas.fun is his website. All the links are in the description below this video. Sign up for the Cartoonist Kayfabe e-newsletter. We are on the race to get 15,000 subscribers to Cartoonist Kayfabe. So like, subscribe, and follow, hit the bell icon. We'll let you know whenever new vids are available. We want to increase those subscriber numbers. We're going to go back. We're going to reconvene privately, discuss some Alan Moore things, and figure out what our next episodes of Read More Comics are. But your marching orders at this point in time, Kayfabers, is to read more comics yourselves. Moore.